to Tales from the Veil. Are you ready? The veil is thin tonight. Tales from the Veil.
I always hated the sound of that house at night. The way the wind slips through the cracks, the groan of the floorboards, the slow pop of the old wood settling. Even as a kid, it felt alive. My grandma's house was old. It had been in the family for generations. And every summer, when I was a kid, I was shipped off to my grandma's, since my parents traveled a lot for work and I couldn't be home alone. It was pretty boring and lonely. I had no siblings or cousins to play with. Those weeks felt like they stretched forever. I never really liked being in the house. It always felt off to me. I mean, it might have been because the home wasn't made for a child anymore, with so many breakable knickknacks, and only one playroom with ugly blue shag carpet, and an old cardboard box that had board games I couldn't play by myself and puzzles that didn't have all the pieces. The rest of the house wasn't any better. So I played out in the garden that was overrun with weeds, which of course, as I got older, became my job to take care of every summer. I mean, I didn't mind too much. It's not like there was much to do. No computer, no TV. Only listening to the local news on the radio. I knew every inch of that house, since there wasn't anything else to do in the evenings, and my grandma wouldn't let me play outside at night. So, I used to play explorer, like I was on some grand hunt for hidden treasures. But there was one room I never went into. In fact, I never even wanted to be in that hallway, because at the end of it, a dark oak door. It looked older than the rest of the house, or at least it felt that way. It was always locked. Not that I ever dared to go in there. It felt like the door was watching me. It was 1,000 times worse than that feeling you get when you turn off a light and turn your back to the darkness. You know that feeling, right? I remember asking about it once. I'll never forget my grandma's face as she looked at me. Her face just changed. It became tight. The color drained. "That room ain't for you. Some doors don't need opening." I believed her. God, I did. I mean, for years, I wouldn't even walk past it. I'd avoid that floor altogether. But kids are curious. One summer, when I was 10, I dared myself to just touch the doorknob. It was cold. Ice cold, in the middle of July. And as I was walking away, I heard it. A jiggle. Like someone else was trying to open it. I was so scared I ran back downstairs to my room and I didn't come out for the rest of the evening. That was the night I had the dream. I was standing in the hallway, but it felt wrong. And as I walked uncontrollably to the door, the hallway seemed to stretch and bend away from me. And as I got closer, the door opened. And inside, a mirror. I don't remember what happened next. I only remember waking up cold, shivering. Eventually, I fell back asleep dreamless, thankfully. But when I woke up, my arm hurt, and when I looked down, scratches, thin red lines across my arms. After that, I begged my parents to never let me have to go again. So, years passed. Summers came and went. Eventually, I stopped visiting. And then my grandma died. At 32, I was the only living family left. Everything she had went to me. I told myself I'd sell it, just clean it out, sell everything, box the memories. Simple. But the moment I stepped back inside, all those memories settled on me again. The smell of her lavender soap, the ticking clock in the living room, the long, dark hallway, and the door. Waiting. I wasn't going to open it. I swore I was going to leave whatever was in that room to whoever bought the house. But there it was, an old brass key, sitting right there on the fireplace mantel. I'd never seen it before, but I knew exactly what it would open. And I was curious. So I did it. I opened the door, and it was preserved. The ancient wallpaper yellowed but whole. A rocking chair by the window, and that mirror. 7 feet tall, dark wood peeking out from a heavy cloth. I should have left. God help me, I should have just closed that door, but I didn't. I reached out, and I pulled the cloth back. I expected my reflection, but what I saw was a child. Me, 10 years old again, standing there in the glass, just staring back. Pale, wide eyes, lips moving frantically, but no sound. What? And somehow, I heard it. "You left me here." She pressed a hand against the glass, the same scratches I once had, fresh, red on her arms. "Let me out, please, let me out, let me out, let me out." I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds. Could have been hours. I turned, and I left. I locked the door, and I walked away. It's been a few years since I sold it. Sometimes I feel a little guilty that I might have wrecked someone else's life. I don't understand what it is I saw. And sometimes I have that dream where I'm back in the hallway, but I always wake up before I walk in the room, and I hear it sound like fingernails scraping. And if I look into a mirror for just a second, I'm not the one looking back. It all started when I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, scrolling through my phone, just eating leftovers straight from the container, when I saw the article. Buy an Italian villa for €1. It's the kind of headline you don't take seriously. You know the kind, you just click on it to daydream. Apparently, in tiny rural towns across Italy, homes were being sold for the symbolic price of €1. Old stone houses left abandoned for decades, crumbling into hillsides, were being offered to anyone willing to restore them. The villages were dying. Populations had dwindled. Storefronts had closed. Children grew up, moved away, and never came back. All they wanted was for someone to live there, breathe life back into forgotten streets, be a warm light in a window again. The only catch? You had just 3 years to fix it up. It sounded like a storybook, like I could play out my own version of Under the Tuscan Sun and become Diane Lane. I kept reading, and by the time I reached the end of the article, my leftover noodles were cold and congealed in the container. I sat there, half cross-legged on my cheap rug, rereading the last paragraph over and over. It felt like someone had written it for me. It sat with me for a while. For days, I just couldn't get the idea out of my head. Finally, I told my friends about it. You know, in that kind of way you do, to make it sound like you're not really serious about something, just to hear what they'd think. And everyone had an opinion. A money pit, one friend said over drinks. It would bankrupt you in 6 months. Another just laughed. You? Living in the Italian countryside? You don't even speak the language. Deep down, I think I was waiting for someone to just talk me out of it. But no one ever did. I mean, their warnings sounded familiar, like echoes of the same logic I'd said to myself over and over. But when I sat down and really thought about it, I wasn't happy. I had a tiny place in New York, and I worked way too hard. And most of my money went to rent anyway, so I figured if I just put that money to construction and used my savings, which I never used. I worked too hard to take vacations, and to be honest, I was always too scared to use it on a big purchase. So I stopped listening to people's negative responses and my own fears. I quit my job, and I found one I could start remotely in a few months, sold off everything I didn't need. I downloaded a language app and practiced awkward phrases in the mirror every morning. And when my apartment lease ended, I filed the paperwork, transferred the euro, and officially became the owner of a home I'd never seen with my own eyes. A house with no photos, only a hand-drawn map and an ancient floor plan. Soon, I was on my way with everything I had in just a few large suitcases. The drive to the village from the airport took me longer than I expected. The roads were twisted, laid down centuries before cars were even imagined. Narrow, stone-lined, and unforgiving. My rental car scraped its undercarriage more than once, and I winced each time. When the GPS finally gave up and lost signal, I drove the last half hour by instinct, following painted road signs with faded lettering, my memory of what I'd seen on the map, and praying I wasn't being foolish. It was early morning when I arrived. The village unfolded around a sharp bend, and there it was. Tree-lined streets. The buildings were tight and weathered, stacked beside one another like old friends. Flowers spilt from a few scattered window boxes. Laundry lines stretched across alleys, clothes waving like flags. Somewhere nearby, I could hear a rooster crowing. No cars, no tourists, no signs of anyone rushing anywhere. It was quiet in a way I didn't know places could be quiet. And at the very edge of the village, tucked into the base of a hill as though it had been gently set there and forgotten, was the house. My house. The front gate creaked when I pushed it open. It had been swallowed by ivy, thick, dark green vines that curled around the fence and clawed up the front wall. And then I saw it. A bit old, crumbling, but beautiful. The paint on the shutters had long since peeled, and several of the second-floor windows were cracked or missing entirely. A fig tree stood beside the house, tall and unruly, its branches stretching across the roof as if trying to get inside. I made my way to the front door. I stood there for a long time before unlocking it. The key was cold and heavy in my hand. The lock groaned when I turned it, and the door gave way with a long, reluctant sigh, a sound like breath being let out after years of holding it in. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mold, just age. The kind of old air that lives in closed spaces, dust, plaster, stone, and something floral underneath it all, lavender or fig, or something that had long since dried out. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the main room. The terracotta floor was cracked in a lot of places, but held solid underfoot. The walls were tall and bare. There was a fireplace built into the far wall, massive. It's the kind you could stand inside. There was barely any furniture left, and most of it was rotting away, except for the mirror. It stood in the front sitting room, facing the doorway that led to the kitchen, over 7 feet tall, framed in faded gold filigree that had darkened to bronze with age. The glass had a clean fracture running straight through it from top to bottom, not shattered, just split. It felt like the room had been designed around it, like the house had been built to hold that mirror. I spent the whole day just walking from room to room, exploring every nook and cranny, and I knew I was home. I really loved the town. The village felt like something out of time, small and self-contained. The cafe didn't open every day. The post office was a bakery. A man sold vegetables out of the back of a truck that never seemed to move. 2 young kids kicked a deflated soccer ball up and down the main square every afternoon. There was no urgency to anything. Even the pigeons looked unbothered. The villagers were kind, but not curious. They nodded when I passed, returned my buongiornos, and answered my questions about where to buy sandpaper or which cheese didn't need refrigeration. Strangers greeted me cautiously but kindly, correcting my clumsy Italian with soft smiles and patient nods. But their eyes were careful, not unwelcoming, just restrained, like they were holding back something they didn't think I'd understand, or maybe they just didn't want to explain. No one asked me about the house, not once, which felt strange. In a town this small, a foreign woman buying the crumbling villa on the edge of the hill should have been a conversation starter. I was the outsider in the furthest house from town. It practically wrote itself. But they kept their distance. When I asked for help with things I couldn't manage alone, the roof, the stairs, anything involving ladders, I got vague apologies, shrugs, excuses. Days passed, and one woman eventually approached me directly. She caught me outside the butcher shop on my 3rd or 4th trip into town. She was tall, angular, maybe in her 70s, wearing a thick wool shawl, even though the day was warm. I'd seen her once before, sitting alone outside the cafe with an espresso, just watching the people in town as they walked by. This time, she stopped in front of me, held out a loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper, and pressed it gently into my hands. I thanked her, or tried to. She just looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were pale, almost gray. Then she said in slow, careful English, "You will need help from the outside." I didn't understand. Outside? She nodded once, then added in Italian, "La casa vecchia ma viva." Her eyes drifted past me towards the curve of the road where the trees began, and where my house lay off in the distance. And then she left. I stood there for a while with the bread in my hands, wondering if I should follow her. But I didn't. I walked back to the house, a little slower than usual. I repeated the phrase quietly as I typed into Google Translate, since I wasn't sure if I understood her correctly. The house is old, but alive. I thought it just sounded like she was being poetic. Maybe she meant the villagers didn't feel safe working on such an old house, since everyone is older. They wouldn't want to hurt themselves. It made sense to me when I broke it down that way. From the beginning, I had decided I was going to film the process of renovating, not because I expected anyone to care, but because I needed to feel like someone was watching me. I wouldn't be so completely alone out here, and of course, more practically, if enough people did watch, I hoped I could make some extra money from TikTok or YouTube. Every morning, I'd prop my phone up on a tripod and hit record. Sometimes I'd film while I was sweeping, sometimes while knocking out old plaster, sometimes just while drinking my coffee in the kitchen. I posted daily, quick clips on TikTok, longer updates on YouTube. €1 villa, week 1. What they don't show you in the articles. Restoring a forgotten house alone. The algorithm liked the drama of it all. The solitude, the mess. It felt like a story people wanted to root for. And things were going great. But the longer I stayed, the more the house felt aware. At first I thought it was just creaks and shifts of old wood. All houses have a rhythm. The old pipes would creak and groan when I got the hot water working. Sometimes I could hear the buzzing of wires, and the house would settle at night when the temperature dropped. But the sound started to change, like the sound of the stairs creaking like a footstep, or a thump of something falling. I figured it was a wild animal. I mean, there were some broken windows, and I hadn't even gotten to the second or third floors yet. I was fine with that explanation. But then things started to move. It began with a hammer. I was filming a time-lapse of myself cleaning out the sitting room, dragging out busted shelves and rusted curtain rods. I remember setting the hammer down near the wall next to the bag of joint compound. I placed it carefully, handle tucked in, head flat. I even adjusted it for the camera angle. Then I left the room to grab water. When I came back, maybe 5-10 minutes later, the hammer was gone. I stopped short in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. I scanned the floor, the counter, under the chair I'd used. Nothing. Then I saw it. 6 feet away, placed on the terracotta tiles in the middle of the kitchen, right along a faint seam between 2 older warped tiles. I bent down and picked it up slowly. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either, just held, like it had just been set down from being in someone's hand. I checked the footage. The video cut off after I left the room, a storage space issue on the phone. No movement, no sound, nothing caught. I tried not to read into it, but the next day, the same thing happened with the tape measure. I remembered setting it on the windowsill after measuring for future cabinets. A couple hours later, I found it on the floor in the exact same spot as the hammer, lined up neatly across the same seam between those tiles. That spot was starting to get under my skin. I ran my hand over the floor there. The tiles were solid. The grout was slightly darker than the rest, but that could have been age. I knocked gently. No hollowness. No give. Something about it just felt creepy. I don't know. Maybe it's just being in a large house by myself. You see things in the shadows when nothing's there. The next day, I filmed myself painting a wall and talked about how hard it was to find the right primer in town. But you could see me. I just kept glancing off camera, my eyes drifting towards the floor. Later that night, I caught myself looking in the mirror. I wasn't trying to. I'd walked past the sitting room like I always did, lights off, phone in hand, ready to turn in for the night, but I stopped. The mirror reflected the hallway behind me, my figure dim in the glass. I didn't move for a while, just watched. There was something about the crack, the way it divided my face. It made my eyes look uneven, made my mouth seem off-center. It felt like I was looking at someone else. I told myself I was being weird about it, but I still left the room faster than I needed to. I went straight to bed and tried to forget about the whole thing. I decided that everything that was happening, everything I was feeling, was just because I was tired and worn out. I woke up just after midnight. No sound, no dream, no nightmare pulling me out of sleep. I was just suddenly awake. My eyes opened straight to the ceiling, my heart already beating a little too fast. My limbs felt tense, my chest tight. I wasn't groggy or disorientated. I was just on, like something had triggered a silent alarm inside me. I lay still for a moment, trying to figure out why. The house was quiet, aside from the sound of rain starting up again, a soft, steady patter against the glass, the kind that settles over everything and makes the air feel heavy. Outside, I could hear the fig tree brushing against the balcony rail, its branches dragged across the wood with every shift of the wind. Normal things. Familiar. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't. I sat up slowly, listening, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It was faint but steady, slow, controlled. It sounded close, but not in the room, just beyond the bedroom door. I froze. My eyes locked on the door across the room. The handle didn't move. The hinges didn't creak. But I didn't need to see anything. I felt it. I knew that sound wasn't the house settling or the wind finding a crack to squeeze through. It was someone breathing, and they were trying to be quiet. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just sat there stiff, heart pounding in my ears, waiting for something to happen. A knock, a voice, the sound of a footstep. Anything to confirm that I wasn't just imagining it. But after a few long, dragging sounds, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt intentional, like it knew it finally got my attention. I stayed in bed for a long time, maybe 10, 15 minutes, long enough for the pins and needles to start creeping into my legs. My ears still tuned to every creak and shift in the house. But nothing came. No more sounds, no more breath. Eventually I pushed the blanket back and got up. I moved slowly, carefully, like I was afraid the stiff mattress springs as I got up would give me away. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it just to be sure. Nothing. I opened it a sliver. The hallway was dark, but not fully. The moonlight had made it through the rain clouds just enough to glow faintly through the high windows. It cast a pale wash down the hall, dull and silvery. No movement, no shadows shifting. I stepped out barefoot, the tiles cold under my feet. My hand traced the wall as I moved, not for balance but for reassurance, something solid to hold on to. I passed the sitting room. The tall mirror was there in its usual spot, angled towards the kitchen. I didn't look at it. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped. Something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, just a subtle shift in the air, like the room was still holding on to heat from someone who'd just been there, or like walking to a space that had just recently been disturbed. I reached for the light switch. That's when I saw it. Something was on the floor. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was real. Small, centered almost perfectly in the middle of the room. I stepped closer. It was a mirror. Not like the tall one from the sitting room. This was small, handheld, about the size of my palm, an ivory handle, silver frame, and a faint rose pattern etched into the back. It looked delicate, old, but well cared for. I crouched down slowly, my eyes scanning the floor around it. It was clean. No dust, no scuff. And there was a thin layer of condensation across the glass, like someone had just exhaled over it. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The kitchen light flickered above me. Once. Then again. 2 sharp bursts. Wind. It's just the wind. It's just the wind. I stayed crouched there, holding the mirror, suddenly aware of how cold the air had become. My skin tightened and prickled. My arms pulled in. The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees in just seconds. I looked the mirror over. And when I looked in the mirror, the foggy surface had cleared, but everything was distorted. The glass looked fine, but what it showed was wrong. Then I saw it. In the background of the reflection behind me, something moved. Just a shift in the air in the far corner of the kitchen, like a figure that wasn't quite solid. A shape that bent space around it. I turned around. Nothing. Just a dark corner, same as always. I stood up slowly, set the mirror on the counter, and stepped back. I didn't want to hold it anymore. I didn't want to be near it. It wasn't fear exactly, not the jump scare kind from a horror film. It was something else, like being in the presence of something that didn't belong. Something was watching. I turned on every light on my way back to the bedroom. I kept my eyes off the mirror in the sitting room. I had enough of reflections for one night. I locked my bedroom door when I went back. The next day I didn't film, didn't post, didn't open up my laptop. I stayed in bed for most of the morning, listening to the normal sounds of the house shift and groan, alongside the sounds of the rain that still pitter-pattered on the glass. Once I finally got up, I went through the day like nothing happened. I cleaned. I ate. I avoided the mirror on the counter. But the truth is, something changed last night. And I can feel it watching me even now. The next day, I decided to focus on the upstairs. I needed something normal, something manual and quiet. A room to clean, a wall to paint, anything that didn't involve mirrors or objects moving on their own. There was a narrow hallway on the second floor that led to 2 bedrooms and a small study with a strange half-sized door. It looked like it had been added as an old servant storage, maybe the office of the butler or the head maid, tucked between 2 beams, with a warped handle and hinges that creaked in protest. Inside, the room was barely wider than a closet. The ceiling slanted hard to the left, and there was just enough space for a narrow desk, a single wooden chair, and a shelf lined with brittle books whose spines creaked when I touched them. I set my phone up on the window ledge and started filming. A little walkthrough for TikTok, mostly so I'd have something to edit later. I talked to the camera as I dusted and swept, narrating in that soft, half-self-aware tone I'd picked up from other renovation creators. The desk was fragile, the legs warped from age. I didn't expect to keep it, but I wanted to check the drawers before I moved it. 3 of them slid open easy, empty. The 4th was stuck. I pulled gently, then harder. It scraped open with a loud groan, and I flinched at the sound. Inside was an envelope, sealed. It was yellowed, the edges curled, and it looked like it had been stuffed carelessly, forgotten for decades. The name on the front smudged from the damp that must have wrecked the desk. I carefully opened it and slowly pulled the letter out. The handwriting was beautiful. Ink, faded almost to brown. I unfolded it carefully. It was in Italian. I was a little proud of myself. I didn't need an app this time. I'd spent enough weeks here, reading signs, trading broken sentences with the villagers in town and contractors from outside of it. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The handwriting was elegant, full of loops and flourishes, written quickly, maybe nervously. My love, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Hopefully, not forever, but long enough that I wanted to leave something behind. Something just for you. I know you'll be lonely when I'm gone. I wish I could take that from you, but I hope this moment, finding this, brings you something warm, something just for you to keep. The house will feel empty at first. I know how quiet it gets, but remember, it was always your place more than mine. You gave it its breath. You filled it. Don't let the house become a tomb. Let it be a home again. Open the windows, play the piano. Speak out loud, even if no one is there to hear you. I love you. Don't wait too long to feel happy again. Yours always. I read it 3 times before I moved. The ink was warped along the bottom edge, water damage keeping the writer's name a secret. The signature was a dark blur. I couldn't make out any of the letters, just the curve of a capital letter and a sharp hook at the end. I stared at the page for a while, letting the words settle. I didn't know who he was, but I know it had never been opened, and it made me incredibly sad. I took my camera and recorded some close-ups, thinking this was for sure going to get some views on TikTok. I folded it back along its original creases and carried it downstairs, fingertips pressing the folds flat again. I left it on the kitchen table, and as I passed the mirror, the tall one standing silent and cracked in the sitting room, I stopped. There was something in the lower right corner of the glass. I stepped closer. A smudge, a faint streak across the inside surface, almost like a fingerprint, or something had pressed its face to the glass. After that moment, I grabbed a painting sheet and just tossed it over the mirror, done with whatever it felt like showing. That night, I went to bed early. I didn't bother with uploading or editing any footage. I told myself I was just tired, that the letter on the kitchen table wasn't as important as I kept pretending it was, and that the mirror didn't creep me out so much. I turned off all the lights, except the one in the hallway. I planned to sleep in the next day. There was no rush to get anything done, so I just snuggled into the warm quilt on my stiff old mattress and started dreaming. I was in the front sitting room, but it looked different, cleaner, like it had once been. The plaster was intact, the walls were painted, there was furniture, and a high-backed chair, a small table near the window, and a beautiful rug stretched across the center of the floor. The mirror stood uncovered. No crack, and a woman sat in front of it. She was turned slightly to the side, so I couldn't see her face clearly. Her dark hair was braided and pinned up. She was turned slightly to the side, so I couldn't see her face clearly. Her dark hair was braided and pinned up. Her dress was long, the fabric soft and well-worn. She sat very still, not frozen, just quiet. She wasn't looking at herself in the mirror. She was looking at something behind her. I tried to move closer, but the room didn't change. The dream didn't shift. I wasn't walking. And yet suddenly, I was standing right beside her. The back of her neck was exposed, pale, tense. I couldn't see what was in her arms, but I could tell she was holding something tightly. I wanted to speak, to ask who she was or what this was, but I couldn't make a sound. The moment held like that, long and still. And then I heard the piano. Two low notes, dull and uneven. Not from the dream, from the house. The sound came from another room, muffled, but unmistakable. I opened my eyes. I was back on the bed, still wrapped in my quilt. The air in the room was cold. I didn't move at all. I just laid there listening. The house was quiet again. The distant sound of rain against the front windows. And my breathing. I sat up slowly. There was no piano in that home. I stood, walked to the hallway, pausing at the edge of the sitting room. The mirror was uncovered. The sheet I had thrown over it was on the floor. Fallen to the ground. I ran in and rushed to cover the mirror back up as quickly as I could so I could get back to the safety of my bedroom. By late morning, I had convinced myself I had been overreacting. The night before had rattled me, sure, but in the light of day, with the sun fully warming the windows and dust floating lazily in the air like harmless static, it was easier to dismiss the strange things as exactly that, just strange occurrences. A few sleep-deprived hallucinations, a dream that happened to line up with an old house's creaks and moans, a heavy blanket that naturally fell off the mirror itself. Maybe I just wasn't adjusting as well as I thought. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, sipping it slowly, watching the birds flip between the fig tree branches outside. The warmth of the mug in my hands felt grounding, real, solid. I tried to focus on that. The mirror still sat covered in the next room, draped in the same linen sheet I'd thrown over it. I told myself I wasn't afraid of it, which wasn't entirely true. But I also wasn't ready to admit out loud that I was genuinely nervous around an inanimate object. Eventually, I walked back into the sitting room and stood in front of it. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, mostly just to hear something besides the quiet creak of the floor under my weight. It's a mirror. It's an old house. And clearly, I am not Diane Lane. The sheet came off easily in my hands, soft and cool, and I folded it without thinking, like I was closing up some silly stage prop I'd used for a show no one was watching. The mirror stood tall and still in front of me, the same as before, cracked down the center, gold trim dulled with age. My reflection was clear, my movements matched, and for a moment, it felt stupid that I had just let it take up so much space in my thoughts. I went back to the kitchen, determined to make use of the afternoon. The place was still a mess. Dust covered nearly every surface. The broom leaned uselessly against the corner, and the counter was littered with small items I'd meant to put away 2 days ago. I swept a little, moved dishes around, rinsed out an old cup that had gone cloudy from mineral stains. The normalcy of it all helped, just small, repetitive tasks that didn't require thinking. I reached over to open the window, and that's when I saw it. Sitting on the ledge above the sink, half hidden behind the curtain, was something small and ivory-colored. It hadn't been there earlier. I would have noticed. I stepped closer. It was a child's comb. Ivory-handled, narrow, delicately carved with a small rose pattern on the side. The color had gone slightly yellow with age, but the detail was unmistakable. A perfect match to the hand mirror I'd found days ago on the floor. I picked it up carefully. It was heavier than I expected, cool to the touch, and there was a single hair still caught in its teeth, dark, longer than mine. I turned slowly, scanning the room as if I'd find someone standing behind me, waiting to see how I would react. There was no one. Just the steady hush of wind moving through the fig tree outside and the faint creaking of the hallway as the house settled again. I walked to the counter and I picked up the mirror. Side by side, the comb and the mirror were a matched pair. Same pattern, same ivory tone, same delicate craftsmanship. It was too specific to be a coincidence. I held both in my hands for a long moment. I placed them down carefully, one beside the other, and backed away from the counter. I needed some air. I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door without checking the time. I didn't lock it behind me, I just left. The air outside felt sharp and bright. The sunlight was colder than I expected, but it helped. The walk into town took longer than usual. My legs felt heavy, but every step grounded me a little more, brought me back into myself. By the time I reached the square, the cafe was just opening. The same 3 tables were arranged outside, and a single older man was sweeping the front step with slow, even strokes. I ordered a coffee without much of a plan. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I didn't want to film anything. I just didn't want to go back yet. As I sat down at one of the tables, I looked toward the far edge of the village, where my house sat, quiet against the hill, slightly apart from the rest of the buildings. It looked harmless from here. Ordinary, even. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug and I stared at the steam. Maybe I would just finish what I came here to do. Meet the renovation deadline, file the paperwork, and leave. I mean, the house would be worth more by then anyway, especially once the other expat buyers moved into the other abandoned homes on the far side of the village. Or maybe once more people arrived, I'd feel less alone. Maybe I'd make a friend or two. Maybe this whole thing had only felt so strange because I was so isolated, and isolation does things to your sense of reality. Maybe what I needed wasn't a break from the house. Maybe I just was too alone. I hadn't done a live video since I first got to the house. Back then it was all excitement and curiosity. A charming wreck of a building, bad lighting, good intentions, and 1,000 people watching from around the world to see if I could turn a crumbling villa into something livable, something beautiful. This time it didn't feel charming, but I went live anyway. The kitchen had the best light, so I propped the phone up on the counter, angled the camera towards me, and hit go live. I didn't have a script. I wasn't trying to film a reel or a curated moment. I just needed people, real ones, even strangers, to be there in the room with me. The numbers ticked up slowly, 100, 200. The chat started to fill with familiar usernames. Hey, she's back. Finally, an update. Oh my God, this house. I miss this content so much. I smiled, a little tight, and I waved. Hi, okay. I wasn't sure if I should go live, but I figured I'd be honest today. I kept my voice light, casual, like I was talking to a friend over coffee, not low-key unraveling. I know it's been a few weeks. I've been taking a break from editing, I said, eyes flicking to the chat. Things have been weird. Not bad, just weird. I flipped the video to the back camera so I could show my followers. This showed up on the floor a while ago. I didn't bring it with me. It's not mine. I thought maybe it had been tucked away somewhere, but I've been through every drawer in this place. And then this appeared on the windowsill today. It matches. Same style, same material, no clue where it came from. A few ooh and creepy messages rolled in. Some people joked that I was getting haunted by a Victorian ghost with good taste. Others asked if I had found a secret compartment or an attic box, and I smiled at the screen and I shrugged. I wish. That would make more sense. I paused. Something shifted in the background of the video. In the mirror that was across the hall and in the other room, a flicker of movement. I looked up toward the sitting room, and in the mirror, the tall one, something was there. A figure. Not detailed, just enough to register a shape, a presence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was gone in less than a second. I ran closer to the mirror, braver since I had all these digital people with me. The mirror reflected only what it should. The empty sitting room, the light from the front window, the edge of the hallway into the kitchen. I looked back at the screen. The chat hadn't noticed anything in the comments, just confused at why I ran. Did anyone see that? There was something behind me in the mirror. The comments kept scrolling. No one saw anything. My hands felt cold. Did it not show up? Seriously? Nothing? I ended the live a minute later. There wasn't anything else to say. Later that night, I replayed the video. I watched it over and over. The moment when I saw it, where my eyes lock, where I pause mid-sentence, is there, but the figure isn't. Nothing is visible in the mirror. Not even a blur. It was raining. No, it was more than raining. It was a storm that I was afraid would wreck my home and rip the tarps off my broken windows. It started a few days ago as a nice little spring shower, and it didn't seem likely to stop anytime soon. It had turned into a raging storm. Not the kind of gentle, romantic rain that made me want to sip something warm by my giant fireplace and pretend I was in some Victorian film. No, this was the kind that clawed at the shutters and tapped relentlessly against the glass like it wanted in. The kind that made the villa sigh in protest. Beams creaking, old nails settling, leaks coming in through the roof. The wind weaving its way through every cracked window frame. I was in the front room, curled in the old velvet chair I hadn't reupholstered yet. Laptop balanced on my knees, editing footage from earlier in the week. The mirror sat across from me, angled in that annoying way where it caught more hallway than wall. I still didn't love it. Something about the way it absorbed light instead of bouncing it, like my reflection always looked. Tired. I dragged the timeline forward, skipping past my awkward intro and straight to the B-roll. The sound of my own voice filled the room, overly bright, a little too cheerful. I scrubbed ahead, looking for usable shots. Then the sound came. I paused. Is that from the kitchen? I sat there, frozen, waiting for a third, but nothing followed. The rain picked up again, a gust of wind groaning through the walls, slapping the tarps around. Lightning started to flash. Maybe it's just the weather. Maybe a pipe? God. I hope it wasn't a pipe. I didn't have the budget for another repair this week. Crossing my fingers, I got up to go check, moving my laptop off to the side. I passed in front of the mirror on my way towards the kitchen to check, glancing out of a habit. I stopped. For a split second, I could have sworn my reflection was off. He didn't move right, like it lagged behind, turned its head slower than I did. I spun back to look directly at it. Just me. Just tired. Needing sleep, needing answers from a house that had none. Still, I stepped closer. I reached out and touched the glass. Lightning flashed and the thunder crashed, making me jump. I pulled my hand away and stared at myself a second longer, as if maybe I'd see something I'd missed. But the reflection stared back, calm and still. I felt a bit silly. The storm was getting to me. I peeked my head into the kitchen, and I heard another knock. Then the lights flickered. Just once. Barely. Just enough to send that small thrum of unease through my chest. I shook it off and went back to the chair, settling in. Reopening the laptop, I had one last folder to check, a time lapse I didn't remember saving. The file was long. Kitchen camera. Labeled with a timestamp from 2 nights ago. Weird. Did I forget to shut the camera off? I hit play. The video loaded slowly. Rain in the windows. Lightning flashing every so often. The kitchen bathed in shadow, just shapes and outlines. For the first hours, nothing. Then movement. I blinked and scrubbed backwards. There. Just after 3:14 a.m. Me. I was in the frame. Barefoot, hair messy, same old sleep shirt. I walked into the center of the kitchen and stopped. Right there. Over that same damn spot where things kept turning up. The exact center of the room. I just stood there. No swaying. Hardly breathing, arms loose and my head slightly down. I didn't move for 3 full minutes, just stared at the floor. Then turned around and walked out of frame, back the way I came. Then the clip ended. I stared at the screen for a long time. My skin buzzed with something cold and ancient. I had no memory of that night, no clue why I had been in the kitchen, or why I had been standing there. I had to admit, I was really starting to get scared of living here. I had been putting off the kitchen floor for weeks. It was one of the bigger jobs, messy, loud, expensive. I didn't have the tools, the time, or the energy. And part of me had been using the weather delay as an excuse to avoid dealing with the cracked terracotta tiles altogether. They were beautiful, even in their broken state, warm reddish clay aged to deep burnished orange and uneven and worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. But they were also unstable. Several had hairline fractures that shifted when stepped on them. One had a full corner missing, the edge sharp enough that I'd slice my toe walking barefoot at night. I had sent photos and a few broken pieces to a restoration contractor 2 towns over who specialized in traditional Italian tile work. He messaged me back a week later to say he could replicate them, not just similar, identical. Same shape, same finish, even the faint molting that came from being hand-fired in small batches. It would take time, but eventually every floor in the house could be brought back to life, one room at a time. We decided to start with the kitchen. The contractor, Luca, was coming in from outside the region. He had good reviews, worked alone, and didn't seem fazed by the age of the house or the strange layout. His price was fair, and he didn't ask many questions. I liked that. By the time Luca arrived, I was already dressed in paint-stained work clothes, my phone propped up on a small tripod near the edge of the kitchen counter, recording for a daily update I hadn't decided whether I would actually post. He arrived in a dusty blue van, calm and competent, with weathered gloves and a quiet, methodical energy that made me like him immediately. He moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew exactly how long every part of his job would take. No wasted motion, no dramatic sighs, just work. After a quick walkthrough, he unpacked his tools and started in the far corner of the room, kneeling on a thick mat and scoring the grout lines with practiced precision. I grabbed a pair of gloves and helped haul out broken tiles. The sound of them cracking under his hammer filled the kitchen, sharp and final, and I collected them into a plastic tub to carry out back behind the fig tree. My camera stayed running. I didn't talk to it this time. I just let it capture the process. Luca working silently, me moving in and out of frame, the rhythm of renovation returning like muscle memory. It was halfway through the second hour when something changed. Luca had been working in the exact same spot where the hammer had once turned up, where the mirror had appeared, where everything strange seemed to land. When I noticed, he stopped. He was crouched low, motionless, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening for something under the floor. I walked back inside, brushing off my gloves. Everything okay? He didn't look up at first. Then he shifted the hammer aside and ran his palm over a section of exposed subfloor. The tile around it was gone, the broken pieces piled neatly beside him. And then he told me that that part of the floor was different. I walked closer to see what he was talking about. He tapped the wood floor gently with his knuckles. The sound echoed slightly, hollow. It was a panel, not part of the regular subfloor. He pointed out how the wood was darker than the rest, the grain tighter, smoother, almost worn, like it was added much later. He reached for a pry bar and wedged it into the groove, working slowly. I crouched nearby, trying not to let my hand shake. He pulled back the larger piece of wood to reveal a hatch, a really old one, with an inlaid handle that made it lay flush with the wood, its hinges oxidized over. Then he asked the dreaded question, did I want him to open it? I hesitated. My throat felt tight, but I nodded. Yeah, please. The hatch lifted with a groan, the sound of dry wood separating from its frame after too many silent years, and hinges that were breaking layers of rust and oxidation. A staircase descended into the floor. Old stone steps, narrow and uneven, disappearing into a black square below the kitchen. Luca stood up, shining a flashlight down into the hole. I leaned in beside him, breathing shallow. The beam caught a stone wall, a dirt floor. Something like a storage shelf collapsed against one side. Dust hung in the air like fine smoke. Nothing moved. It looked dry, old, was probably original. A cellar that maybe held coal or wine, fruits, vegetables, all of the above. It's hard to say with a place like this. And then he looked at me and asked if I wanted to go down. I was already backing up, shaking my head without realizing it. Do you mind going first? He climbed down slowly, his boots scraping against the steps, the flashlight beam bobbing in front of him. I waited at the top, listening, arms crossed against the chill that had crept up my arms. After a few minutes, I followed. The air was different down there, still and cold, but not too musty. The stone walls looked ancient, laid by hand, not machinery. It was one open room, maybe 10 feet by 10, low ceiling, packed dirt floor. A single rusted hook hung from the ceiling, unmoving. There was no furniture, no markings, no bones, no symbols, nothing that should have made it feel ominous, but it did. There was a weight in the air, not heavy like pressure, just heavy like a memory. Luca didn't comment on it. He was already climbing back up, satisfied there was no moisture damage, no termites, nothing to worry about. I followed him, my legs heavier on the way up. He went back to removing tiles. I went back to collecting the debris and dumping it into the tub. But the whole time, I couldn't stop myself. I kept glancing, back towards that opening in the floor. I went to bed late. I didn't want to sleep. Not with that hatch open. It wasn't a new door, I had to keep reminding myself. It had been there the whole time, just hidden under the kitchen floor, under the tiles I'd walked on every day since moving in. But now it was uncovered. Open. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and left the hallway lamp on like a kid. I told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. It was just a cellar. It was used for wine or coal, just something normal. Still, I double-checked the lock on the front door, and I didn't look at the kitchen as I passed it. I didn't look at the mirror. I just kept my eyes forward. I just headed straight to bed. I couldn't sleep. I just laid on my back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I was tired, but my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept picturing the stairs. The way the air changed halfway down, the way the walls looked dry but felt wrong. There was no smell, no moisture, just cold and quiet. It's too quiet. I mean, even the dust was just untouched. Eventually, I drifted off. In the dream, I was standing at the top of the cellar. It was dark, no light from above, no flashlight in my hand. I couldn't see anything, just the shape of the stairs going down. I could hear scraping, coming from below, slow at first, like metal on stone, or something duller, like nails. I heard movement, shifting, breathing, and then a voice. It was faint, muffled. It sounded like a woman. She was crying. Then speaking, it took a minute to understand. Her words were slurred, like her mouth was covered or she was far away. Let me out, please. I beg you. The scraping got louder. Something heavy dragged across the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even look away from the dark. It just felt like something was about to appear right in front of me. Like the moment just before someone leans in close enough to be seen. And then I woke up. I sat up too fast. My chest hurt. My heart was racing. The room was dead quiet. I looked around. Nothing had changed. Same door. Same hallway light peeking underneath. I could still hear the wind outside, just barely. I waited. I didn't move. And then I heard it. Not mine. It was soft, steady, too close. It was coming from next to me. I turned my head slowly. There was no one there, but the sound continued. 5, 6 seconds more. Then it stopped. I didn't want to go back down there. Not in the middle of the night. Not after what I just heard. But lying still wasn't helping. My heart wouldn't slow down, and every time I closed my eyes, I just kept expecting that breathing to start again. The quiet, steady sound that hadn't come from me, that had just been beside me on the bed, too close, so real. I told myself I imagined it. I told myself I was just exhausted and still shaken up from the dream. But no matter how many ways I tried to explain it, I just couldn't stop thinking about the cellar. I had to go down. I needed to see it again. I needed to know that it was still just a room, cold and empty, and that nothing else was hiding down there waiting to crawl back up into my head. So I got up. I didn't bother with shoes. The floor was cold, but I didn't care. I left the bedroom light on, grabbed my phone off the dresser, flipping on the flashlight without even thinking. My fingers were shaking more than I realized. I passed through the hallway light, slowly, pausing at the edge of the kitchen, like I expected something to be waiting there for me in the dark. The cellar door was still open. I stepped carefully onto the stairs, holding the phone low so I could see each uneven step. The light wobbled in my hand, and the shadows it cast didn't help. They stretched and warped along the stone walls, like something was moving just outside my periphery. At the bottom, I paused and listened. The cellar was colder than it had been earlier in the day. The air felt heavier, like something had shifted underground, hadn't settled again. It was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It's the kind of silence that presses on your skin. It makes you aware of every inch of your body. I turned slowly in a circle, sweeping the light across the space. The walls looked the same at first. Rough stone, a few dark beams, dust. The low ceiling curved slightly near the corners. Nothing had changed. But when I turned towards the far side of the room, I stopped. There was something off about the wall directly across from the stairs. It wasn't obvious at first, just a small difference in how the light hit it. The texture didn't match. While the rest of the cellar was all jagged stone and old mortar, this section looked smoother, a little straighter, too clean in some places, like the pattern had been interrupted. I walked closer. Up close, it was even more clear. The wall had some seams. Not cracks, and it wasn't damage. Seams, like something had been built there, covered up. The surface was slightly bowed, and when I raised my hand to touch it, the stone felt a little colder than the rest. My phone's light flickered just once, and that's when I heard it. Not clear, not words I could understand, just a voice. Light. Too light, like it wasn't coming from the room but through it. Muffled and distant, but it was definitely there, coming from behind the wall. I took a step back. My breathing had gone shallow, and something shifted in my chest. Not courage, not even clarity, just a surge of pressure, a sudden sharp need to do something, to get to it. I didn't hesitate. I rested my phone on a broken shelf, and I grabbed an old iron pipe Luca had leaned against the tool bin near the stairs. I brought it up hard against the wall. The first hit echoed like a gunshot in the stone room. The second blow cracked something beneath the surface. The third broke through. Plaster, not stone, fell away in a cloud of dust. The wall hadn't been real. It was a cover, a false front, maybe a few inches thick, and behind it was a door. Old, wood. I stared at it for a long time before I reached out. My hand was shaking as I touched the flat door handle. It felt warm. And then I heard her. A soft sound, barely there, coming from the other side. The sound of someone who had given up hope. I opened the door to a narrow broom closet, and in the back corner, slumped and crumpled, was a woman. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide and she didn't speak. She just held tighter to the bundle in her arms. A child. A baby. And the baby wasn't moving. My hand stayed on the door frame, gripping the edge as I leaned forward. She didn't move. I quickly turned around and grabbed my phone, twisting back as the beam of light moved with me, cutting into the narrow space. For a second, I thought she was alive, crouched in the corner, frozen, protecting the baby. But as I stepped closer, the shape didn't shift. It didn't breathe. It didn't react. She wasn't there. Not anymore. What sat slumped in the back of the closet was a body. Mummified. Something in between. The skin was dry, thin like paper. Parts of her face had collapsed inward. But her hair was still there, dark and tangled, matted around her shoulders. Her arms were wrapped tight around a smaller form. A child. The baby's bones were curled against her chest, wrapped in the remnants of what had once been a blanket. The fabric was brittle and darkened with age. I didn't move for a long time. The only sound in the room was my own breathing, too fast and too shallow. I didn't want to touch her, but I had to see what she left behind. I reached for the folded paper that was sticking out of her breast pocket. It was dry, stiff, the edges crumbling a little as I opened it slowly. I held it in the beam of my phone light and stepped back into the cellar, where the air was just slightly easier to breathe. The handwriting was still legible, thin, looping ink, a few smudges, but most of it was clear. I read the letter slowly. To anyone who finds this, please do not forget me. I do not want to vanish from the world with only their lies left behind. I am not what they say I am. My husband left for the war. Before he left, we were expecting. This baby was his. I never touched another man. I never invited anything into this house. But after he was gone, I could see him in the mirror. Every time he would stand behind me, and I could be with him again. I told one of the town wives at the market. She must have told everyone a lie, that I did some sort of witchcraft. They said it wasn't my husband, that it was a demon sent to fool me, that the child I carried wasn't my husband's, it belonged to something else, some demon. They say they are going to protect the town. They won't leave me. They guard the home even now. I know what this means. I know what they are planning. I have heard them whispering near the windows. I don't know when it will happen, but it will be soon. So I plan to leave. I will sneak out in the night. I am going to leave this letter so he or someone else on my side can read this and find me. Whoever finds this, please remember me. Adriana Costa. As soon as her name left my lips, the air in the cellar seemed to thicken. It just pressed in, and then I heard it. Not through my ears. It was inside me, around me, like it came from the walls or the air itself. Come back. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't angry. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second it felt like I'd just been picked up and spun around in place. The walls looked the same, but I didn't want to be down there anymore. Not with her bones. Not with the letter still open in my hands. I ran. I didn't think. I just moved out the cellar, through the hallway, and into the sitting room, where the mirror stood like it had been waiting for me all along. I stood in front of it, still holding my phone, the flashlight beam aimed low, now forgotten. My reflection looked pale in the glass. Skin dull, lips bloodless, eyes too wide. For a moment, it was just me. Then something shifted behind my shoulder. I didn't turn. I couldn't. She was there. Adriana, standing just behind me in the mirror's reflection. Her arms wrapped tightly around a bundle. Her baby. And her eyes fixed on mine, like she had always been watching, waiting for me to see her. She didn't look angry, or lost, or frightened. She looked tired, worn down by time. Her face was gaunt, her hair long and slightly tangled, falling over one shoulder in a loose braid. The baby didn't move. She held it close to her chest like it was still something to protect even after all this time. My own reflection had gone still. I wasn't blinking. I don't think I was breathing. She looked at me like she had been waiting for this moment. And then it happened. A sound. Sharp and sudden. A second crack split the mirror. It cut through the glass from just above my reflection's shoulder and up through Adriana's face, clean and jagged, like it had marked the end of her. I didn't move. Neither did she. And then she smiled. Small. Soft. The kind of smile that only happens when the waiting finally ends. And then slowly, Adriana began to fade. Not like the trick of a light, not like something stepping back, just fading, softening, until her outline blurred. Her hair dissolved in the reflection behind her, and her face disappeared entirely. Then the mirror only held me again, fractured in reflection. I slowly sank to the floor in exhaustion. I sat on the floor for longer than I realized, my back resting against the wall. The faint glow of my phone's flashlight still pointed upwards towards the ceiling, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Not from fear, not even from shock, just a kind of quiet that took over my body, like I'd finally stepped off a tightrope I didn't know I'd been walking. The house felt different, not fixed, but not pressing in anymore. When I finally stood, the stiffness in my legs hit me hard. I walked slowly through the house, barely noticing the chill of the tile under my feet. The kitchen was still a mess, leftover broken tile, the hatch to the cellar gaping open, dust streaking across the floor. But even with all that, the silence had settled in a way that didn't feel dangerous anymore. It just felt finished. And then I heard it. 3 soft, deliberate knocks against the front door. I turned slowly, heart suddenly in my throat again. Not full-on panic, but alert, sharp. I crossed the living room, unlocked the door, and pulled it open. The sun was just starting to rise. That first hour, golden, soft, just cresting over the hills. And everything outside looked washed in amber. The stone road shimmered faintly with leftover dew. Shadows stretched long behind the trees and buildings, crisp and low. It was the kind of light that made the world feel quieter, like it was still deciding whether or not to wake up. The old woman from the cafe stood on the front steps. She looked smaller in the morning light. Her long coat was buttoned to the collar, and her hands were folded gently in front of her. She didn't glance past me, didn't ask to come in. She just looked up at me and softly said,
"You found her."
I didn't answer. My throat tightened, and I nodded once. Her mouth trembled slightly, just the corners, and she took in a long breath through her nose, like she'd been holding it all night. The light caught the edges of her hair, showing the strands of silver woven tightly into the bun at the back of her neck. She didn't cry, but she looked tired, in a way that grief makes you tired, the kind that doesn't just sit behind your eyes, but wears you down to the bone. She wrote about you. About the town, I mean. About what she heard, what they believed. The old woman blinked hard, and she didn't look away.
"It's a stain. A sin."
I stepped outside, just enough for the light to touch my arm. The breeze was faint, but warmer now, and the scent of earth and something sweet, maybe lavender or stone fruit, had started to drift up from the field beyond the trees. I want to give her a funeral, I told her. Not just bury her quietly and pretend none of it happened. I want people to see her, to say her name, to know what was done. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded, once. She turned without another word and walked slowly back down the path, her shoes soft against the damp stones. Her hands stayed folded as she walked, until I couldn't see her anymore. I stood there until the sun cleared the trees. The house behind me no longer felt heavy anymore. It took 2 days to prepare. The old woman came back the next morning with 2 others. Men, in their late 60s, one with a rounded back and the other with sharp cheekbones, and eyes that didn't meet mine at first. They said little, but they brought supplies, blankets, lanterns, a wooden box built by hand and sanded clean. They helped me lift Adriana and the baby from the tiny closet. We moved slowly, carefully. The room was quiet the entire time. No one spoke until we carried them up the stairs one at a time. By that point, word had spread. The villagers didn't ask many questions, but they came. Some looked angry, like this wasn't something they wanted dug up. Others looked pale, not surprised, just ashamed. You could see it in how they held themselves. Hands clasped low, eyes kept down, the way some people looked at the ground, as if they might see her ghost walking over it. By the time we gathered outside, there were more than 24 people standing on the road behind the house. Some had brought flowers, others just held hands. A few of them stood far back from the rest, unsure if they should even be there at all. The box sat in the shade of the fig tree, a cloth draped over top. I stood beside it with the old woman. She looked more tired than she had that morning on the doorstep, but steadier. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands, the letter, and asked if I would read it. I did. The same words I had read in the cellar, I read them again now, in front of everyone. About the mirror, about the fear, about what they believed and what they did because of it. Her name, Adriana Costa, hung in the air after I said it. No one clapped, no one nodded. But something shifted in the group, a silence that wasn't empty, heavy and deserved. Afterward, the men who had helped me carry her built a small resting place on the hill just beyond the house. The townspeople didn't leave right away. Some came forward one by one and placed flowers or small offerings on the soil. Rosemary, lavender, coins, and even broken pieces of mirror wrapped in cloth. They didn't say her name out loud, but they didn't look away either. No one spoke about the people who had done it, their grandparents, their great-uncles, the priest who had moved away long ago. But the truth sat with them now. They carried it in their shoulders, their silence, the way they stood beside one another without knowing where to place their hands. The funeral was short, but it was real. And for the first time since coming to this place, I truly felt the weight of the house shift. Like maybe I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. I posted the update a week later. It took me a few tries to get through it without my voice catching or losing my place. I didn't script anything, I just talked. I told everyone what I found in the cellar. I told them Adriana's name and her babies. I told them what the villagers had done. I didn't accuse anyone. No one alive was to blame. Most of the people watching didn't ask if it was real, they just listened. The response was mixed. Some believed I was telling the truth. Others thought it was all staged for likes and views. But most of the comments were just saying they were glad she was finally at rest. With that wrapped up, I was able to get back to work. We got the kitchen tiles down, and the new cabinets ordered, cleaned out a few more of the rooms on the second floor, documenting the fun hidden knickknacks I'd find. And I wasn't alone anymore. More expats had started to move in. There was a young couple from Manchester, 2 houses over, a retired teacher from Boston in a corner lot with blue shutters. I wasn't sure how much any of them knew, if they had heard what had happened with me in the house, or if they eventually came across my videos. But I felt like the town was finally coming alive again. There were more open windows, more movement in the streets, and the villagers seemed to welcome the new members that had been added to the fold. Even the cafe had added 2 new tables outside. The house felt peaceful, still quiet, still old, still temperamental in small ways, but it didn't feel like it was holding its breath. I got rid of the mirror, not in a dramatic way. No smashing it or burning the frame. I just got rid of it. It had cracked twice, and both times had felt like something had finished, like the moment was done. I didn't feel any anger or resentment towards it, but I didn't feel the need to keep it either. It showed what needed to be seen. It had done its job, and whatever it had been, a doorway, a warning, a reflection, it didn't belong in the house anymore. There were times, even after everything, when I still wondered if there was more to it. Truth be told, I would get scared that maybe the devil did live inside of it. If there were other doors, other names, other truths still buried behind stone walls and silence. If everything in the house wasn't just Hadriana. So it had to go. Some things, once laid to rest, should stay that way.
These stories may be over, but the veil still remembers and never forgets who's been listening.